U.S. national editor at the Financial Times, Ed Luce. He's out with a new opinion piece this morning for the Financial Times entitled, "Even if Trump loses, Trumpism will live on." Also with us, the author of Winners Take All, MSNBC political analyst and publisher of the .Inc. newsletter, Anand Giridharadas. His latest piece is entitled, "Why Don Quit Donald, the story of a voter who changed his mind." So this is a great sort of parallel of different stories. I think I'll start with you, Anand, and tell us about the voter.
I put out a feeler. There was this polling that you just cited before the break. 86% of Trump's 2016 voters are still with him, but 6% are not. And I think in the discourse right now, it's easy to forget that 6%. So I wanted to know who they were. So I put out a feeler on Twitter to share stories with me. And I got the most extraordinary story about a man named Don, 87-year-old man in Southern California, kind of a moderate rock red country club Republican, coming of age in the 50s and 60s. It kind of talks about how the hippies are ruining America in the 60s to his kids. If you don't like America, love it or leave it. But a kind of sane, reasonable Republican, maybe that Joe would see himself in. Fighter pilot in the Air Force, then commercial pilot for American Airlines. And 20 years ago, Don gets Parkinson's, and his daughter tells me this story of as she saw it hurt his body and his mind, he started to become, one of his symptoms became kind of gullible to conspiracy theories. And this was in the moment in American life when disinformation was ramping up, Fox News was ramping up, email forwards about birtherism are ramping up, and Don became one of millions, tens of millions of victims of an American age of disinformation, and starts to really think President Obama was born somewhere else, starts to become sympathetic to Trump, who's against everything he believes, votes for Trump. And then a very strange thing happens, which is Don, because of the progression of Parkinson's, loses the ability to type his passwords into his computer, and he gets locked out, and he stops suddenly being able to read all these email forwards, and he kind of turns away from Fox News. And as soon as he is unplugged from this IV of untruth in Trump's first year in office, he falls out of belief. The high goes away when you take the drugs away. So much of Trumpism is upheld by literally living in fantasy. And so his family watches, and they worked on him. 2018, he starts to come around. 2020 rolls around, and Don says, for the first time in his life, 87-year-old guy, I'm going to vote for Democrat. I'm going to vote for Joe Biden. He's a stand-up guy. And the twist in this story is, as he starts asking in September, where's my mail-in ballot? I need my mail-in ballot. And the reason he was so impatient, although many of us are impatient right now, is Don, at the same time, even as he was awaiting his mail-in ballot, had decided under California's End-of-Life Option Act, because of his debilitating terminal disease, he had decided to end his own life in late September. And he was hoping against hope, that his ballot would arrive before his scheduled date of leaving this earth, flying west, as they say in the Air Force, and waiting. And he wanted, as his last thing on earth, for it to be known that he made a mistake in 2016, that it's okay to change your mind in a democracy. In fact, that's the only thing that has ever saved a democracy. And his daughter shared his story with me in the hope that others who have outlived Don will be able to help honor his last wish.
It's a fascinating story. It reminds me, Willie, though, of when Anand was talking about emails that were getting passed around. We sit and think that disinformation started with Facebook and started with other networks. I remember when I was in Congress, my mom would sit around. There was an email that used to go around back when email was the best way to spread conspiracy theories. And I'd get it every morning. It'd be like, did you know 372 members of Congress have declared bankruptcy? 262 are child molesters. 148 have killed. I was like, Mom, I'm in Congress. Stop saying this garbage to me. But back in 1964, 65, I think there was a book about Lyndon Johnson called None Dare Call It Treason. And, there were rumors about LBJ killing all of these people, killing Kennedy, of course. We had the rumors of George H.W. Bush shipping cocaine into South Central L.A. When he was running the CIA. We have stories of then of Bill Clinton spread by Jerry Falwell in the Clinton Chronicles of murdering people. Of course, the George W. Bush is a Nazi, the birtherism. This has been going on for quite some time, Willie. It's just easier to spread the lies, easier to spread the virus these days because of Facebook.
Yeah, I remember those emails you're talking about. They often, one line would be in red font, the next one in blue, and different font size, those crazy emails that would go around. The difference now, I think, is I've talked about quite a bit, is that there's a president now who's lifted so much of that out of the shadow and given it legitimacy and told people who believe those things, like the Q conspiracies, that they are valid, that this is real, that they should be pursued. He's amplified them with his own voice. He's amplified them online. And as you say, Facebook has a huge role in all of this too. And it's part of the reason, Ed Luce, that you're writing about in your new column about Trumpism, that if Donald Trump loses this election, or if he loses in 4 more years, if he not loses, but if he leaves the White House after a second term in 4 years, that Trumpism will, in fact, live on because of the stamp he has put on so much of this over the last 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably will lose on November 3rd or whenever the votes are counted. But this isn't going to be a Walter Mondale 1984 kind of defeat or a Barry Goldwater 1964 kind of defeat. There's going to be somewhere between 60 and 70 million Americans, somewhere between 42 and 45% of the country still voting for him after all that's happened. And I think it's pretty clear that the Republican Party, there was a great Axios study on this in fact earlier this week, the Republican Party is more Trumpian today than it was 4 years ago, and even than 2 years ago. It's not got too many Joe Scarborough Republicans left in it, or Rockefeller Republicans, or Jeff Flake Republicans. It is as much now a QAnon party, perhaps more than it is whatever remains of the Rockefeller Republican wing. There is also a great study by the German Marshall Fund that came out this week that shows that Americans who get fake news or news that's dressed up to look like legitimate news but is fake has more than tripled on Facebook and other social media sites between now and 2016. So the point I'm trying to make, I guess, is that even if Biden wins, which I think he will, this isn't like, a vaccine with the pandemic. It's not the end of Trumpism. It's going to remain a force, and it's going to be something that Biden has to deal with, particularly, with his first priority, which is getting a national coronavirus strategy rolled out.
Yeah, Mike Barnickel's with us, and he's got a question. Mike.
Anand, the Fox News industry, the pipeline, I have been amazed continually and increasingly at the impact it can have on people and holding them to the beliefs that they hear and see on Fox, thinking that everything is the news. Does it strike you as anything reasonable could happen here if Trump loses, that this sort of disintegrates, or do you think it continues its power, its hold on people?
I think you're absolutely right about the power, and it really is to bridge 2 different things that were said in the last few minutes. It's Fox News multiplied by Facebook, which in many ways is the new Fox News. One of them is in your pocket and is particularly working with the addictive dynamics of your phone that are now better known. The other is this television portal into your brain, a different route. But let me make a hopeful version of the point, which is I actually don't think this era would have been possible without a substantial number of Trump voters essentially not living in reality, right? I don't think that, I would argue that 80% of Trump voters probably do not know or think to be true most of the most salient facts that would make one not vote for Donald Trump. right? I don't actually think a lot of those voters know those things, face those things, believe those things, and then still form a view of Trump as positive. I have spoken to many of those people. They live in a castle of fantasy. They don't know reality. And what that tells me is we don't have a problem. We have a problem of there being some number of people in this country who actually want the worst things for us. But there's a much larger number of people who are living in a media ecosystem. And I should say, I think it's Fox News primarily, to be sure, but I think we're all in this. We're all in this. Those of us in the media who do both sides headlines, we're all guilty of it. I think we need to, obviously, even in this network, there's been disagreement. I personally would dissent from the town hall tonight, but I don't dissent from interrogating him. I don't think you got to give him platform, give him dessert because he skipped dinner. But I think we should interrogate the daylights out of it. But we need to have a media culture that holds these people to the fire and helps the kind of tens of millions of Americans who have essentially been living in a castle of fantasy to frankly come in from the cold.
Ed Luce, after 2016, there was a lot of hand-wringing by reporters. There was a lot of hand-wringing by people on TV saying, we need to go out to the country. We need to get out of our bubbles. We need to understand what's happening in, quote, the real world. And what I've seen over the past several years talking to my friends is, I'm sorry, it's just the opposite. Like, they are not, and I'm talking about my friends, I'm talking about people I love, I'm talking about people who have helped me with my children, that have helped me in my life when I'm at my lowest point, people that I love. They are not low information voters. They are people who, as Annan said, have plugged into an alternate reality. People who watch information and get a steady diet of information that's objectively false. There's the only way you can say it. They choose to go to sites on Facebook that spread conspiracy theories. The questions they ask me are extraordinary. When you talk about children in cages, they say, yeah, but that was Nancy Pelosi who did that. I said, what, have you not read that people were sitting around a table and they actually raised their hands and voted to cage children as a policy to keep? No, that's not true. That's just a liberal press. That's it. And I can say the same thing about coronavirus. Again, friends that I have known and loved for decades will be on the phone with me and they will say, oh, COVID is no worse than the flu. It's just like the flu, despite the fact that even Donald Trump admitted to Woodward privately, it's 5 times worse than the flu at least. Every doctor they would go to would say that. But they are not low information voters. They are alternative reality voters because they choose to go to websites that tell them lies. They choose to go to networks that tell them lies, that give them an alternative reality that they're comfortable with.
That's absolutely right. I mean, my favorite's probably the wrong word, but one of the ones that strikes me the most, and you keep coming across it, is that it's dangerous to wear masks. And in fact, wearing masks sort of traps carbon and you catch all kinds of microbes you wouldn't otherwise catch. Which is news to the medical professionals who've been wearing masks for the last century. You'd have thought if there were a problem that would have ceased to be the mainstream medical practice. So, yes, the only sort of caveat I put to what you say is that all of this is available through simple technology on the radio. But Rush Limbaugh says all this stuff too. You don't have to be going to websites. It doesn't have to be digital. It doesn't have to be hyperlinked from one to another. You can just turn your radio on and listen to Rush Limbaugh provide the sort of meta narrative that is then picked up by all the online sites. And the other minor caveat that I'd make is that there are pre-existing conditions that led to Trumpism that people to reject politics as normal. And I think the deaths of despair, the decline in life expectancy, the opioid crisis, the rise in suicide rates in post-industrial areas. All of these are sort of ingredients in the creation of a despair that led to Trumpism, which of course is a cure way worse than the disease. But there is a legitimate crisis out there off the internet in the middle class that's been made worse by Trump, and which Biden is going to have to address. That's, I think, the ultimate cause here of America's distemper.
And by the way, Mika, when there is a New York Post article that is false, it's much better for Twitter to let people read the New York Post article and sit there and laugh at the hokey story of a computer repairman looking at a computer going, this sure does look suspicious to me. I'm going to call Rudy Giuliani. Like, let that out, okay? Because people will read the story and then they'll go, this is really one of the stupidest October surprises I've ever seen before. But what did he have, x-ray vision?
Oh, my Lord. Okay.
What?
Ed Luce.
This don't look right.
Thank you, Ed.